Good afternoon to you all. Let's then start this afternoon panel, the second seminar of cryptography, policies, and fundamental rights. Well, to start, I will say this seminar counts on the support of ISOC, Internet Society Brazilian chapter, and the Direitos na Rede Coalition, which is an entity that joins 48 organizations of civil society and academia in Brazil, in which IP.rec is part of. I'd like to thank everybody who's here already with us, watching us in the second panel. And we'll start introducing our debaters in this afternoon. Today, we have a team, have a full team talking about national challenges, cryptography, data protection, and penal process. We'll have that as a roundtable format, so the speakers will have from 7 to 8 minutes to talk about, well, the questions, the guiding questions. We will address them, and then we open for questions from the audience. So if you there watching us, if you have any questions on that sense, well, for our speakers today, you may send them using the chat function or the Q&A box that we have down below on Zoom or up below, depending on the version, and we'll send them to our debaters as they arrive. Well, to present or to introduce, I'll start with Bárbara Gomes, researcher of the Internet Society Research Institute, with cryptography and digital rights, as well as digital inclusion articles. She studied at UniCEUB. She's graduated from UniCamp and postgraduate from UniCamp. We have Paulo Rena, a master in law and a doctorate student in law as well. He was one of the creator of the civil framework of Brazil, and part of an NGO, part of the rights in the work. He works with cryptography in the Brazilian chapter of Internet Society. Thank you, Paulo. We have Karen, Maxim. I apologize. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. Nevertheless, she leads the law enforcement response team, the part of trust and safety team of Zoom, and on Zoom she was responsible for the requests of the law enforcement agencies, transparency reports from the government, and policies for trust and safety team. Welcome, Karen. Thank you very much for being here with us. And last but not least, we have Gustavo Vilar. He's a criminal expert from the Federal Police, graduate in data processing by the Paraíba University, forensics in the University of Pernambuco, and also in crime science. He has a master's in crime science. Well, first to start, I will send forward, well, I will start with the first question that we have selected for our debaters, which is this. What, in your view, what are the main public policies and bills and legal decisions that offer challenges to strong cryptography? I believe Bárbara may start then. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation, for being here. My dear colleagues, it's great to be with you to debate this theme that is very dear to me, cryptography, and especially its dialogue with the challenges of the investigation authorities, as well as information security and public information and public security as well, when all these spheres meet. So to think about the challenges of strong cryptography in the Brazilian scenario, well, brings us back to the history of this challenge. This is not something that starts today, and we've seen this debate taking place in different moments, in different contexts. The debate of going dark and others, as well as all this narrative built around the potential hardship that information security tools such as cryptography would mean. Well, to the implementation of laws or to the enforcement of laws, in fact. So, and this has happened other times, and although it has been seen throughout time, the idea is that this tug of war still remains, and I don't know if it's going away anytime soon. In my opinion, the Brazilian scenario of cryptography protection and incentive is quite solid. Well, we have legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks to request cryptography as a right, such as the right to freedom of speech and the civil framework of the internet. And we have a regulatory framework that that supports the development of cryptography, its incentive, but we go through different attacks, especially legislative attacks that attempt to put this debate in jeopardy. Well, there has been a study from the cryptography mosaic where they saw what were the last debates in Brazil and how that has moved around. So this is the way forward. This is the pathway. Although we have solid legal frameworks that support us for the use of strong cryptography, there are legislative attacks, if I may, and especially what is in our radar, the reform that Article 305 has started, that supports the risks of strong cryptography, as they require the assistance towards interception and well, implicated in the backdoor to the exceptional access to cryptographic information. This would be this is to undermine the technical capacity of cryptography. And we're going through a long debate of the fake news bill, and Rena is going to talk about that, and he's going to mention that deeply. And those demands for responsibility, well, for them to take place, you'd need to break the strong cryptography, and this is not done on a technical level of cryptography. Perhaps you don't break the code, but you'd use tools that circumvent that, and that damages what and harms exactly what cryptography wanted to protect. Well, I believe this debate once and again is around us, in this tug of war between the cooperation requirements and in private information access. They are ever present in our scenario, and that is one of the reasons for us to be here, and how to address those issues in such a way that our digital rights do not go back in time and do not have setbacks, and how to advance this debate for public security and law enforcement not become shock points, but complementary to one another. And I believe this is the one challenge, both in the debate level as well as in regulatory level, with regards to talking to our authorities and our lawmakers first advance. And this, to build on that, will, I believe, we've had recently the recognition or a step forward towards the importance of cryptography with the Supreme Court trial on the blocks, and the justices endorsed the importance of cryptography in the defense of the protection in the advocacy of digital rights. And I'll stop here, and then we can continue the conversation. Thank you, Ana. Gustavo, would you like to talk right now? Can you hear me? Okay, good. So I have even a more pragmatic view with regards to the challenges we face, especially with regards to the to lawmaking and transition of those laws to become actions. Brazil, perhaps it feels weird for people who may live in different regions of the planet, but we have here, if you ask me how many laws we have in Brazil, I can tell you, I have no idea. Well, we have approximately 10,000 laws, regular laws, 5,800 decrees, and 11,000 special decrees or orders. So the legal framework is a bit touchy. Well, those decisions, they go into action and produce their effects on society. Well, from the beginning of 2000 or 21st century, I can consider myself someone from the last millennium. And so from the beginning of this new century, we notice a political will that is very strong, especially on federal level, of updating our legislation with regards to the challenge of the IT challenges widely. Well, we have laws that deals specifically with data protection, that deal with privacy protection, and as a rule of thumb, well, we end up entering an area of issues. Where can the state go into without harming the relationship with privacy? Those are antagonistic rights that end up clashing with one another in the search for the solution. Although it's easy in the theoretical point of view, in the practical point of view, we clash into a serious theme. Well, from a moment that you have a law that says, well, the communication providers should provide access to a cryptographed channel where the state may interfere in. Well, that in the point of view, in the theoretical point of view, it's quite simple for you to say, but when you go into practice to implement a solution that circumvents the cryptographic protection, well, you start going into an area of technical implementation of hard execution. So the challenges are there on a federal level for us to sort that out. I won't even go too much into the member states or the municipalities, because I'll be dealing with another legislative capacity. With all due respect to the legislators in my country, we see there is a deficiency in education in our representatives, in our municipal representatives and some state representatives. The ones that go to the federal parliament, well, they have a better capacity of understanding, in a better capacity of, well, training, even to understand these new technologies in which cryptography is part of. So it's not enough to legislate just for the sake of it. You need to understand the technique. You need to understand politically the effects of those decisions on a practical level. Otherwise, we'll go once again in the law making of innocuous laws. And that, in my point of view of a technician, of a citizen, are the main challenges in a continental dimension country.
Thank you, Gustavo. Paulo Renato, could you start? Could you talk, please? Of course. I would like to salute everyone here, everyone that is listening in. Let's go directly to the point. I'm talking here at IBIDEM Brazil in relation to, unfortunately, the public policies and Bill of Laws. We unfortunately have a scenario that is more prevalent in terms of risk and threats, in terms of strong cryptography. I don't see any actions proposed by the public office in terms of municipal, federal, or state level in terms of a public policy that will deal with cryptography without having incentivized the issues related to protection. But commitments made by Brazil internationally are also present. In terms of as it was mentioned before, we have several different proposals in terms of rules and regulations by Congress where they touch on the issue of cryptography and protection of communication and freedom of speech, of freedom of association, etc., which are a problem because it is very difficult to explain for those that don't follow our tradition, political tradition. These bills don't even, what is being discussed is not really even well known. So even fake news affects these bills. So in terms of what was approved in terms of fake news is still being debated, which of course it doesn't even use the true premises in many times, where the things are being discussed in terms of traceability of messages between parties. Two other projects go tangentially. The new Code of Civil Processes is one of them. And I would have to agree and disagree with a little bit with Gustavo, stating that in practice, we see that there's a loophole in these proposals because it doesn't present what would be needed to be effective and to formulate the technological mechanism that would allow safe access for communication, allows for gaps, and we have had any successful experiences in that. But I disagree with what Gustavo mentioned because theoretically it's inconsistent. And conceptually speaking, in terms of cryptography, as Bárbara mentioned, the premise that there is a guarantee of only a legitimate receptor and will receive the message means a lack of, it doesn't occur, which means a lack of protection and a lack of trust, much contrary to what Gustavo was mentioning before. We are really having problems of approving these bills and put forward these public policies based on actual facts. Many of these issues that are being proposed, we can use and we can understand that public security, for instance, law enforcement, they ask for people for their password into the different apps also. And that, legally speaking, is a practical problem in terms of public security, which of course they can oppose themselves. The hiring of IT professionals and the government hacking is also an issue that needs to be discussed. I'd like to just highlight and salute, because possibly in Brazil, we are having a positive effect, which are the decisions made and the votes by Justice Rosa Weber of the two processes that control the constitutionality of decisions which required the breaking cryptography of WhatsApp. And the final understanding was very important for other contexts, because Of course, it involved drug trafficking and other decisions, but these decisions show that cryptography was being protected, and the legitimacy and inviolability of private data is more important. So I'd like to highlight the importance of this panel today, not only to have groups, not only from different sectors working, and I would like to highlight and thank you, Karen, Maxim, for being here. We cannot highlight enough the importance of this holistic understanding of this issue, because individual decisions cannot prosper by themselves. Public policies, bills, or other measures, when they impose these practices on companies or other security measures, affect the society as a whole. So it's important for us to hear individual companies, not only Facebook, not only regarding WhatsApp and other platforms, but Zoom is very popular in Brazil and in the world, of course. And if possible, we need to hear them and see what their opinions are whenever possible, and they need to highlight the importance of cryptography, not only as being part of the business model, but as an environment where it is a protection of human rights itself. That would be the first contribution that I would like to highlight. And of course, I am available for if you have any other issues, or if you'd like to discuss a specific aspect in terms, for instance, of trackability, traceability, or any other aspect. But any issue that is more sensitive here, we need to see that many of the proposals aren't even, in fact, on paper, are really proposed. So we need to laugh so that we don't cry, basically speaking. So I thank you very much for the participation. Thank you. Thank you. I would like Karen, if you would please, just to contextualize, she works at Zoom. She's in the US. So since she's in a different context, which is different from ours, we asked her to come here today so that she can, whenever possible, of course, if possible, contextualize this issue, the situation of data protection, and comparing to what we have here in Brazil. So we have all these issues that have been, that you have just heard about, Gustavo mentioned and Paulo mentioned, and what the issues that we've been discussing, the issues of fake news, the process code that was approved recently, and of maybe the decisions by the Supreme Court in Brazil, which related to blocking WhatsApp. Karen, you have the floor, please.
Hi, nice to meet you, and thank you for having me. Before I sort of answer the first question that Raquel sent me, I just wanted to give you just a touch more background about Zoom and end-to-end encryption and where I came from. So I came to Zoom from a tiny little startup called Keybase, which had about 25 people. And Keybase made a product that was like Slack and Dropbox rolled into one and encrypted roughly the way Signal is. So it was a platform that was a way to manage one's public and private keys. And then we built on top of that very useful apps that people can use for work. For example, group chat, file sharing, encrypted Git for developers, all end-to-end encrypted. Zoom bought Keybase in May 2020. And I would say that the real reason that Zoom bought us was to bring all of our cryptography engineers, who are really about 23 of us, over to Zoom to build end-to-end encryption at Zoom. And they did that very quickly. So now there is for Zoom meetings an offering of end-to-end encryption. I believe that Zoom Phone on the client, when you're using clients, your client for Zoom Phone will soon have end-to-end encryption. And those same set of engineers are still here working at Zoom, now building in additional features for the end-to-end encrypted offering. So when I came over to Zoom, at Keybase, I'd been responsible for basically everything that was not the programming, everything from planning the offsites to answering law enforcement requests to looking out for threats to encryption. And at the time, one of the things that was consuming me was a law in the United States called Earn It. And we're actually lucky to have in the audience, Rihanna Pfefferkorn, who has written extensively about Earn It, which is a US proposal, a bill. So at Zoom now, we have a team of people like Nicholas Andrade, who's also here. He's our specialist for Brazil for government relations. And we all over the world pay attention for laws that are threats to end-to-end encryption. End-to-end encryption is very important to Zoom. We've invested a ton in it. Our users demand it. And so it's very important to us to look for any threats to it. So we have the government relations team working on that. We're also members of a coalition called Reform Government Surveillance in the US. And there are a number of end-to-end encryption providers in that group. For example, WhatsApp and Apple are in there. And those of us who have end-to-end encrypted offerings talk to each other and try to keep a lookout for what's on the horizon. So we are always on the lookout for proposals like the ones from Brazil, particularly proposals that would require providers like Zoom to provide customer or user content in plain text to law enforcement, no matter what. And then there's some sort of consequence if we don't, for example, losing liability protection for whatever that content contains. That's kind of a one way to do it, or criminal liability for Zoom. That's another way to have an enforcement mechanism. We are on the lookout for laws that would require us to give law enforcement access to meetings, either detected or undetected. And we're also, there's another category of laws that we look out for where that would require us to have a human being, an employee on the ground in the jurisdiction to receive law enforcement requests or to receive user complaints about Zoom. Now, those laws look kind of neutral and reasonable on their face. You know, if we're serving Brazil, for example, why shouldn't we have a human being on the ground to answer for Zoom in Brazil? However, the more insidious interpretation of these kind of neutral looking laws is that they give the governments kind of a hostage to hold on their soil, so that if, for example, we fail to provide plain text user content, or if we don't answer a law enforcement request in the way that a government likes, then they'll just come arrest our designated employee of Zoom that they've made us have in that jurisdiction. So those are really the laws that we're looking out for. And we certainly pay a lot of attention to it. And if we ever see something like that, we start talking about it right away. So we're pretty plugged in into threats to end-to-end encryption around the world.
Thank you for your contribution. It was great to know about all those initiatives. Well, you know what? Let's go to the second question that, that also talks about the penal process and the use of investigation and all of the discussions, we've been having in Brazil with regards to the bills that have been spoken of already in the first round. Well, the second question is how the criminal process may harmonize investigation methods with the protective regimen to personal data and cryptography, and is still being successful into modernizing criminal investigation. We understand this is a discussion that is set forth by the investigation, by the law enforcement agencies, in an attempt of modernizing such criminal investigations, even to use tools or more assertive tools rather, into fighting crime and in the criminal investigations as a whole. I'd like to start with Gustavo this time. Can we do that? And then we'll pass the floor to the others. Gustavo? Okay. Well, this topic that you have brought up is important, especially for us who are part of developing countries still, countries that still require improvement. We understand that since the end of the 90s, a great deal of the investigations started being supported on by interception. So the first one was the telematic one. So it is an efficient way for the state to put a little effort and in the process of infiltration and the availability of investigation professionals on the field. And this was being widened, and it became a methodology that is quite well used. With the addition of cryptography, that I believe to be, it's quite healthy in the protection of privacy of the individuals. I believe even the people who are part of the group of commands of countries that have the respect to privacy, well, in a, let's say, different way, cryptography starts as a protective veil. Well, the secrecy of communication is protected by the very federal constitution. We have secrecy as a rule, and the violation of the secrecy is something that needs to be weighed and must go through a filter, a legal filter, in a sense of making abuses. But with the arrival of cryptography and in the mathematical point of view, the mathematical relationship between the objects and operations on cryptography, well, to undo this content or to revert this cryptography is something that is nearly impossible unless you have a situation where you have a let's say, a frail algorithm or an exposition, well, an exposure. I mean, when Paulo said that perhaps he'd disagree with me, well, my assessment, well, perhaps we agree on a sense that it won't be just a bill that will create, will undermine a mathematical relation with keys. When we talk about legislation to interfere, well, the state now is the owner of the custody of keys. So everybody needs to deposit the cryptographic key in a custody, well, a state custody, into the state custody. Well, if you do that, the privacy is not privacy anymore. The communication doesn't happen that way. So the big challenge is for us to try and conciliate and join things that are in the interest of all. Well, the protection of information, first and foremost, the protection to secrecy, and at the same time to prevent the protective means to become shelters that to certain criminal conduct. Well, and myself as representative of the criminal experts, the criminal science experts, we go through the need of a technical body that is trained and qualified. Our country, especially in the reform, the penal reform, we need to have the approval and valuing of, well, similar to the technical staff that will assess the evidence that has the idea, the capacity of dealing with the due process and to deal with cryptography. We're talking about powerful algorithms and keys that are similarly powerful. So I believe that with the aid of these professionals, and unavoidably, I have to go back to the first question. Well, we need to create a legal framework that is modern, adequate, well, in order for all of this law enforcement agencies, being the police, as well as the public prosecutor's office, as well as other investigative instruments in the different arrays of responsibility, well, to create a task force in the sense of having a modern investigation supported in material evidence and supported in the respect to the citizens' individuality, without undermining the responsibility of the state to prevent crimes in the cyberspace. Thank you. Thank you, Gustavo. Paulo, Rena, if you'd like to speak now. Well, yes, Gustavo, we agree that the politics, they have problems to be sorted out, and is part of the responsibility of the state to exercise, among other attributions, the penal persecution. But there's a concern of respecting the guarantees and human rights, and to understand the reality, the technical reality and the practical reality of technology, among other aspects of cryptography. And so regarding the penal process and how it can harmonize these way, I mean, with the respect to personal data, and which is something new in our legal ordinance in Brazil, as well as the protection and defense and promotion of cryptography, and also use criminal investigations to do so well. Basically, it is necessary for the state to work with a composition, which is with this cryptography and modern criminal investigation. The modern criminal investigation. So
Eu falei com ela em inglês.
I'm sorry, I picked a different language. I apologize. The only way that we can modernize in criminal investigations is to understand that it's necessary to having strong cryptography in the public powers actions as well, so state-owned, because you'll have the police in different areas of Brazil, and like environmental crimes in the Amazon, or drug trafficking, or arms dealing. So it is necessary for the state to understand that those are in the different sectors of the public power within the very federal police, and between the military police and the civil police, and the judiciary power. They need to have cryptographic protection. And I'd like to bring something that was brought on the chat by Ronnie on the focus of the discussions, to remind you that cryptography as a technique, it won't be applied in the traffic, but also will be applied in the data, and even can be combined. So historically, we have the experience of the authorities requiring this data to be cryptographed, but nothing prevents people from cryptographing the message the first time, and then after that they go through the weak cryptography of the state, inducing the state to an effort of, well, we're going to have all that, but the state would be making an unnecessary effort for the ones that want to protect. And everybody, well, innocent or not innocent, would be directly be made more frail. So you can't guarantee the state to have strong cryptography if the public policy that it's promoting involves the fragility of the very technologies of cryptography. So, and as a practical aspect, I believe we have a reality of a certain opposition to the bills that have been put forth. But the point being, the state, the AAC, need to abandon these attempts to try and what is inconceivable, and start investing in techniques and initiatives that aim for finding this modernization, respecting those premises and prerogatives towards the very right, the very working and legitimate work of the state, and the working that does not harm the economy or the trust on the internet, or that does not have other effects besides the legal implications. I want to refer to a document from 2008 produced by the United Nations on the special rapporteur in the promotion of the freedom of speech. This report 3825, if you decide to look for this reference in the Council of Human Rights, that brings recommendations, among others, for the states to not to use any law that delegitimate the protection forms, and for regulations to be more, well, to be smarter, not to be unidirectional, and focused in guaranteeing the transparency of companies, and to allow the public choices to be done without a debate, without a democratic debate, to have an effective participation, and not done in a rush, and where you've had violations and requests from the state. So the state must prevent any laws or any arrangement that would require a proactive monitoring or filtering of content, because both are, well, inconsistent, both in as a privacy, a right to the privacy and freedom of speech, as well as the probable causes of censorship or self-imposed censorship before and by the very individual. So instead of adopting the regulatory model to try and work with the legal authorities, and not in mass decisions, and then to publish reports, to have the transparency, because, well, we don't know in Brazil how many crimes were not solved due to an issue in the cryptography issue, looking at all crimes that Brazil haven't solved. Is this a severe issue that requires us to invest in the companies to try and open this point, or is it a failing system that has its inefficiencies, and we would add another complex one, not only in the regulation but in the practice, to have a security that we don't have. This is something required for a modern investigation. Thank you, Rena, for your contribution. I'd like to pass the floor to Karen, well, to hear her impressions, contextualizing with her actions on Zoom and in the US. Thank you.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about how law enforcement works, I don't want to say with companies, cloud-based companies like Zoom and Keybase, but how the kinds of requests that they make, either when the product is end-to-end encrypted or not, or TLS encryption, or just not encrypted. And you can see this in Zoom's our current transparency report, which dates from December 2020, and the new one, which is coming out in probably just a couple more, the first half of 2021. But the vast majority of law enforcement requests for user data are for metadata. And you can see in our new transparency report and our last transparency report how many times Zoom gave over content. And the answer is, I think, 0 or close to 0. 0 last time, I think maybe this time 1 or in the single digits out of hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement requests. Now, part of that is the way that Zoom's product is architected. So Zoom never has meeting recordings or meeting content if the meeting wasn't recorded. So if the meeting was not recorded and someone comes to us for content, there's nothing to give. If the meeting was recorded, but the host or a person recording it chose to record it to their device, then Zoom has no access to that content and we can't provide it. Even if that content exists, the law enforcement will have to go to the user. The only time that a law enforcement can request user content, and we would give it to them if assuming a lawful law enforcement request, it meets all the other requirements in our government request guide, is if the user records the meeting and records the meeting to the cloud. So that's really the reason why we've very rarely been called on to provide content to law enforcement. But the fact is that law enforcement request metadata from cloud-based companies like Zoom a lot. And they can use that metadata to great effect. And I will put a YouTube lecture that was recorded by someone named Micah Lee on how in the US law enforcement are able to prosecute crimes on metadata alone without content. And so in many cases, because the requests that come into Zoom, law enforcement are simply looking for information about who was in a meeting and when the meeting took place and other metadata information about the people in a meeting. And so that's sort of the way that Zoom interacts with law enforcement on that. And so I think something that gets lost from the debate over encryption and this understanding that if you can't provide content, then law enforcement is just totally out of luck. That's simply not true. And the advent of cloud computing has been just a great boon to law enforcement, because in the past, if you wanted to get information about a communication, you would have to go to the user or herself and bust their door and get a warrant. And law enforcement can go to cloud companies like Zoom, like Keybase, and get that same information, but from a centralized point, the cloud services providers, and go to the users. And there's a lot of discussion and debate and reform going on about when companies like Zoom can notify their users. We always want to notify our users when law enforcement asks for data about them. And in most cases we can, but in the US, there are laws that prevent us from doing so sometimes. So I think that gets dropped from the conversation and this debate about the needs of law enforcement. And I can appreciate that it might be harder to prosecute certain kinds of crimes without content, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's a lot easier to get information in general these days because of cloud computing.
Obrigada, Karen. Tem duas coisas que ela falou.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. Two things that you talked about here that are always present in these debates when we talk about investigations and threats to crypto. The issue of metadata. There's already, I don't know if it's a consensus, but there's a directive, a general understanding that these investigations can be done through metadata. The content of the communications, as is normally required and requested by authorities, it would aggregate very little, add very little to the scenario in face of the metadata can mean in terms of data for the investigators. And it's also important to state that information, personal information, and informing the user when law enforcement asks for this data from the company, that is something that is we've been trying to discuss in Brazil, especially in the context of the Bill of Law in Brazil, but it still hasn't. It's still a bill. It's not yet. It's a pre-bill, as if it were, but it's still being discussed with our Congress people and our legislators. But this does show up, and this threat of towards the data of the individuals is present in the reform of the civil code that we've been trying to have. And the question that we have always made is, would this law affect an environment that would protect individuals when they are being investigated, if the data are given? And with that, we try to have a legal framework so that we would better protect citizens when they're being investigated, because of course sometimes there is abuse here in Brazil in terms of that. So I would ask maybe Bárbara for her to speak a little bit more about the second issue, and I would also please tell you all, for those of you that are watching online, that later we will open for questions from you viewers. So I'm seeing a lot of things in the chat, and I'll put forward some of these questions, and some of them were answered already by please feel free to comment whenever you can. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Raquel. I think that when we talk about modernization of in the investigation processes and the issues that you put forth of the law being approved, penal law, new penal code being approved, it's something that we need to not lose focus. And any change in terms of law, any instrument that comes to change the way an investigation can occur and potentially modify digital rights and changes the balance between the digital environment, this needs to be debated over time. This needs to be debated with different sectors in terms of the governance of the internet. So I believe that we do have principles, we do have constitutional rights that need to be obeyed and followed. So any law needs to be, when it comes to modernize the judicial system, needs to be follow the Constitution. So any step forward needs to follow the laws determined by the Constitution before. And even without the penal general law, we do have this background, these laws and these rights that need to be observed and respected. This is a movement that needs to be done very calmly and very so that we can not normalize side routes and shortcuts that we talked about in terms of police work. These are important tools for the internet, for the social development, for the expression of liberty, for the rights of protection of the individual, and other principles that are behind that. There are rights that have been made possible through the internet. This cannot be normalized in this sense. We can't allow that this modernization of our laws can run over our rights. And in this context, I believe that the National Authority for Data Protection, even though it is not directly responsible for legislating in this regards, and this niche where the state acts could have impact analysis, could provide impact analyses when we move forward in terms of regulation, and especially in regards to investigative forces, investigative procedures. Aside from that, I believe, and I agree with what Gustavo said about the need to improve our technical bodies so we can provide information. I think public law enforcement does have. Sorry, there's a car here on the street with a loudspeaker. I hope it's not affecting. So I think there are structural problems that come before this need for the access to this information. So probably this can be very stimulating or very look like a good opportunity, but it does open different problems. It's a structural problem of the number of people affected by this. We see that public security as being possibly affected by this, and it needs training. It needs to provide training for the public servants involved in these procedures, and to make cryptography more vulnerable and make all users who depend on it for a safe internet. I believe that this is premature and very detrimental for the system and as a whole. So Isabella very brightly talked about that in the morning. The crimes didn't increase the number. So probably the breaking cryptography would not help solve more cases. There's not enough evidence that the fragilization of these protection tools would take us to a greater outcome in terms of crime solving capability. So we need to evaluate correctly what is the role of putting millions of users in a situation which is more vulnerable. Once a technique is used, probably the system will be used by other people that were not intended to use them. And so in terms of security, you'll have a reduction in security as a whole. And something that is always in my radar is that cryptography needs to work for everyone. We need to strengthen the debate so that it is for everyone, not only for those that can find other ways of accessing these tools, of using these tools, and not only the traditional kind. So this takes me to the final point, which is I believe that the state should, just like Rena said, should surpass this relation of opposition because this is important for the development of the state itself. So we have to modernize public service, which has been increasing in speed. And last week, for instance, we were in an internet forum in Brazil talking about security issues, incidents, and this subject came up. And so we should change this key and think, how can we think a cryptography can help us to have public systems that are safer, offers better services for citizens, so that we can have a more trusting relationship between the government and the user, the citizen. And how can we promote this culture of security, that not as a threat, but as something that will strengthen, that protects the rights, that is the starting point for an environment that is safe and protected. I don't know if I talked too much. I don't know if you could. I would just like to conclude saying that I believe that any modernization, any opportunity for a modernization about the development of, many times we hear we have like a silver bullet to solve the problem entirely at once. Technology, as if technology would be able to solve any shortcomings of our investigative processes. And I don't think this is the way. And I think this debate needs to occur based on different nuances, thinking about the different rights and of people involved and the different capacities and collective capacities that affect our development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, for your contribution. It was indeed amazing. And we touch up on different points in the universalization of cryptography. And a point that Isabella has mentioned this morning, that cryptography is a right. And we must start also to internalize that and normalize that for us to, well, especially for us to sensitize more and more companies to insert cryptography as a standard in their applications, in the applications that are offered publicly to the general audience, to the general public, because we know there are some applications of public messaging that does not have cryptography as standard, and this offers a series of vulnerabilities for the ones who are using these platforms. And besides that, cryptography is not used only, let's say, only to protect the messages we exchange in this very conversation that we're having with the use of cryptography, but to ensure essential services that we considered that we wouldn't live without. For instance, the electricity network security, banking transaction, all of that has cryptography applied to, and we need it to be more and more democratic, more and more spread onto applications for this to reach everybody. As Anna has mentioned, that's the point of digital inclusion. This digital inclusion needs to be full on and accessed, and people should have access to the safe applications as well, to the secure applications. Now, I believe Gustavo, Paulo first. I had thought about a point that we can help out to radicalize the position, at least my position, with an allegory that I believe to be quite pertinent. I have spoken about it recently, which is first to think in the break of cryptography as an analogy to, well, torture. We, by a very history in the action of our police forces, well, that perhaps in the practical, the police may have hardships into acting without violating the physical integrity, even of a convicted people. So it's not hang people and shock them or whatever, because we know it's not only on fiction or in the documentaries on past events. The Evandro case in Brazil shows that this type of action may be problematic and keeps going to have recent news on tortures of that sort. And it's indefensible that although it is a recurring practice, is not possible that the state passes a law that for heinous crimes and others, there's a life of a child, we may allow torture. No, that's not the case. That is not part of our framework. I understand that the break of cryptography could be elevated to the same threshold, and I echo this perspective of Isabel on recognizing cryptography and the legitimate use of cryptography as a right, as a human right, is a fundamental one. analog to the physical safety or physical security. Well, to understand how we could face, how the state should respect and take it seriously. That's what I wanted to bring. Thank you. Rena and I wanted to talk about the same thing, because I'll go into exactly what you just mentioned. Well, we don't have any time of existing forces that would operate under torture or under intimidation. The Brazilian society, said enough is enough. Perhaps the Brazilian society, one of the last one that arose for that. We cannot take arbitrarity. The Brazilian society, it's over with bullying. We need technical evidence, evidence based on knowledge, not on what is only spoken, especially in torture situation, let's say, because under torture, the person being shocked or having their rights, the more fundamental rights violated, they will say whatever they know and whatever they don't also, because they want to leave the pain. They don't need to speak the truth. It's not because the individual is being harmed that this binds this person to like a truth serum. No, their objective is to start feeling the pain, and the truth is only obtained in investigative means through material evidence, quality, scientific evidence, not by low depth instruments that many times it mistakes more than any aids. Well, I know I'm speaking backwards. I just want to echo with what Paulo Rena said. Well, just like Raquel said, when we talk about cryptography, it's not making something understandable into not understandable. The basis of all operations of the modern society, it assumes cryptography as one of its pillars for the guarantee of confidentiality, which is the most common, as well as to guarantee the integrity and to guarantee authenticity, as well as the guarantee of the non-complaint. Well, you have the whole base understanding that makes cryptography so indispensable, as well as other basic elements in the lives of the human mankind. Well, in the pandemic, when we started working remotely, we depend on technological means to make us ever present in the environment. Just like the last century, we would only be there if well, now you can't go to a bank just to withdraw a certain amount, well, unless it's a withdrawal of money. I mean, without trust, without cryptography, there is no authenticity, as well as other pillars that manage this important tool, which is a Swiss Army knife in the hands of the human man, of the modern man. I mean, thank you, Gustavo. We have 2 questions here in the Q&A box. One is more of a comment. Ronnie, he says, Karen says that the fundamental part of the process is wrong. The least amount of work is to break for the police forces is to break secrecy, but perhaps they might find information in the cryptographed document and out of the scope of the legal document. Well, it is a bit of what you have been speaking. It gets close to what Rena has said on the allegory of torture, because it's a shot in the dark. And if something come up, they may collect that evidence. Otherwise, it's just a break of secrecy for no reason. And there's a question specifically for Karen that says there is a history of companies, even the ones that offer or promise security and privacy, but many times they cooperate illegally with law enforcement agencies. Do you believe that currently are there many companies in the private sector that cooperate in a hidden way with the law enforcement, or you think these corporations are, well, by or they happen only every once in a while. Karen, if you could.
Yes, I answered it in English because I used Google Translate to find out what it said. So again, I mean, I can only speak for Zoom, but anytime if we're ever asked for user information by a government, it has to come in through our proper processes, and we reject requests that don't meet those that basic requirement that it come through a centralized intake and it meets all the legal requirements. And the request has to meet all the requirements in our government request guide, as well as be lawful in the country in which it comes from. And we, in addition to that, we go one step further and we scrutinize all requests just to make sure that they're not, to identify ones that are, we don't want to respond to ones that seem politically motivated or a pretext for something else. So we, in addition to being legally valid in the countries that they come from, we have our own standards that we apply. And then third, those requests, every request that comes in gets reflected in our government request guide. So if a company publishes a government a transparency report, is what I meant, sorry. If a company publishes that, you can be reasonably certain that they have decent practices around government requests. I think that if a company does not publish a transparency report about government requests, then yes, you will want to ask a lot of questions of your own. But there's starting to be some standardization around transparency reports for government requests, thanks to benchmarking work. Like there's a guide put out by the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard, a guide to transparency reporting, and that has made transparency reports pretty standardized. So again, I can only answer for Zoom and what our own practices are. But if you focus on companies that publish transparency reports, that's a good sign.
I see there are many comments in the chat box, and I see many of them have been answered already. If anybody has other questions for our members of the panel, please do so using the chat function. There are many comments on what they already talked about. She says, I wasn't able to watch the whole panel. Will that be made available for us to watch later? I believe so, but I can't give you a proper answer. Diego just said it'll be at isoc.live, and he'll keep the videos logged there. You may watch it later, certainly. And we'll have the recordings both in Portuguese as well as in English for you to watch later on. Let me try and read the comments. Ana, Bárbara, Gustavo, Karen, Paulo. If you have any other considerations, still please do request the floor and we'll open for you. Rena? I believe it's important to go deeper in this in the data area, explaining why we establish that as an issue. The idea that it would be necessary to have a previous monitoring of all messages, all instant messages that are circling around on WhatsApp, and that are being added to the bill that will be directed to, well, information and prevent hate speech, and with the premise that would be necessary to have a procedure to identify the source of those messages that will be harmful. Well, there are contextual points that still need to be highlighted on that. in a very direct way. There are different situations of misinformation and hate speech publicly brought that are not object of this discussion.
This is something that seems not to be very clear for those who propose, who debate these kinds of solutions. So with that, I'd say that it's not that Brazil is working, so solving all its crimes, all its investigations, and they're going after everyone that is held guilty. But if we could reach a cult source of something, and because of cryptography, that would be not the scenario. Okay, so this is not the case. So the possibility of having this system working, as Gustavo mentioned, under torture, when we see a break-in in cryptography, this makes the system fragile. So a teacher can lie. The message that we receive when cryptography is broken can be used as a proof because it's illegally achieved, illegally obtained. So going back, in this sense, to use this mechanism to reach a specific person are based on this, considering this system, we would then have situations where we have, like today, of course, we have who said what, and punishment is not really occur that prohibits this kind of action. We don't even know what to do with these people, with dogs that are chasing cars to make the cars stop, I'd say. So if we can find out that who is spreading this fake news, is it President Bolsonaro, is it president of a specific party, the president of the Supreme Court, what will be done? Will we remove the profiles from these people? Will we pay? Will these people get arrested? What will be done? There's nothing. There's no answer. And this is the kind of thing that we need to think about before we create this traceability. And this traceability, and in practice, the proposal that is being presented, that was submitted to Congress, involved the idea of constant monitoring of messages from everyone, 100%. For enough time to check if that during that period, 15 days, that message would become viral, and then that would be important to find out the source of this message. This kind of requirement would affect everyone before checking the illegality of this. So they would be monitored systematically en masse without any kind of legal basis. So these are problems that are unsurpassable, and they're presented as if they were like little small issues. Of course, this is a violation of human rights, of privacy, and we should at all times shout and state that this is absolutely unacceptable and wrong, and we need to try to show better results and find other ways of getting to the same answer. Thank you, Rena. And Bárbara, please. Yeah, I'd like to take advantage to invite you all to read. Would you be in favor of one of the questions here on the bottom? if you would be in favor of allowing investigation to read your messages, even though you're not directly subjected to the investigation. So we had a lot of specialists to exactly understand what are the arguments related to this and how does this narrative occur? Is it in favor? Is it against? What is being discussed? And we already published the preliminary results. I'll send it here on the chat, the link for that. And we're finally going to publish in a few weeks the final report related to this. So I would invite you all to kind of pay attention to Edis's website. So, and also we do have a few clues about what are the legal points and what we can't lose focus of. So just I would like to invite you all to kind of have a read and take a look at that, please. Thank you, Ana Bárbara. The research you guys did was really, really interesting, and that's something that we need to pay attention to, absolutely. And read and kind of spread and try to use this. Yeah, we have one more question here. There's another question here that is about what can we wait in terms of relevant for cryptography in 2023. If you guys, if anyone wants to answer, please feel free. What to expect cryptography in 2023. Bárbara, did you raise your hand now? No. Oh, okay, that was from before. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down. Does anyone want to answer this question about what to expect from cryptography to 2023? Gustavo? Yeah. When we talk about IT, any prediction, medium or long term, is usually wrong. Predictions that were done in the past were completely wrong. And sometimes there's a path that is not really expected. What do we expect from cryptography from now on? Cryptography, of course, for every evolution, at every moment where we modernize our behaviors, it will be a tool that is indispensable. My mother, she's going to be 80 years old. She clicked on the bit locked. So she already uses cryptography, even though she doesn't really understand what's going on. So there is cryptography, quantum cryptography that is appearing, but we're still in a phase that's initial, that incipient, where they need to be, or you need a machine that needs special qualification, and where we have the duel between the large companies of IBM and see who will have, Google and IBM will fight of who will be able to have a quantum cryptography and so on. But what I could say to you is that we hope that cryptography becomes an instrument that more and more present in everyday's life. After all, with this integration with the integration of objects in our homes, the Internet of Things, as we know, we need for these mechanisms to be safe and secure, because they do have a direct application, and they are more and more integrated in our lives. And nothing more better than in cryptography to be one of the pillars of communication, based on integrity, based on authenticity, based on different elements. Thank you, Gustavo. Yeah, I even used your answer here to put a link here on the bottom of a text that was written by the blog last year that was recommended by José Paulo. He's one of our directors who's having his doctor's degree of quantum cryptography. So it's down here if you want to take a read here and see exactly what it is. It's a little bit complex, right? It's complicated, but it's something that we need to pay attention to over the next few years, right? So